In the secluded mountains of Maryland, the United States Army's Camp Ritchie was far from ordinary. Here, a new class of soldiers was forged, men trained to weaponize the enemy's own language, culture, and tactics against the Reich. The camp itself presented an unusual spectacle. Soldiers clad in German uniforms marched alongside wooden tanks, carefully painted to mimic the Wehrmacht's best. Overseeing them was Frank Leavitt, a World War I veteran and former professional wrestler, who drilled recruits in hand-to-hand combat techniques. Among these men were thousands of Jewish refugees, once German citizens, now stateless by Hitler's decree. Their families had been left behind in concentration camps or worse. But in the U.S. Army, their very German identity became their greatest weapon against the Nazi war machine. At Camp Ritchie, every mission began with a single creed: know your enemy. Guy Stern, born in 1922 in Hildesheim, Germany, was the eldest son of a lively and close-knit Jewish family. A brilliant student, he was his parents' golden boy, expected to achieve great things. However, his world began to change with the rise of Hitler in the early 1930s. At first, the changes were subtle new rules, suspicious glances, whispered insults. But as the years passed, anti-Jewish sentiment turned into open hostility. By the time Guy was a teenager, discrimination was inescapable. School, once his favorite place, became unbearable, filled with taunts and humiliation. Eventually, he confessed to his father, "Classes are becoming a torture chamber." In 1937, as the situation worsened, his father desperately sought a way to escape to the United States. But the relief program could only take one family member. After much deliberation, they made the heartbreaking decision Guy would be the one to leave. At just 15 years old, Guy clutched a small suitcase, said a painful farewell to his family, and boarded a train, then a ship bound for America. Upon arrival, he settled with his uncle and aunt in St. Louis, Missouri. Determined to seize his new chance, he immersed himself in his studies, learned English, and worked as a busboy to support himself. He waited for letters from home, but as war engulfed Europe, they grew less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, Guy, now a college student, felt an overwhelming sense of duty. "I had an immediate visceral response," he later recalled. "This was my war for personal reasons and for this country. I was treated well here." Eager to enlist, he was initially rejected due to his foreign birth. The disappointment was sharp, but he pressed on, continuing his education while hoping for another opportunity. A year later, with the Army in urgent need of fluent European language speakers for a classified mission, he was finally drafted. Summoned to the company office, he received his orders. "I was told I was shipping out," he recalled. "I asked where, and they said, military secret." Boarding a train with no idea of his destination, Guy watched the landscape blur past. Hours later, the train came to a halt deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Maryland. Nestled within the dense trees was Camp Ritchie, an unassuming military post that would soon change his life forever. By 1941, the U.S. Army had swelled from 200,000 to 1.4 million troops. Despite this expansion, a major weakness remained: a lack of trained intelligence specialists who could analyze enemy strategies, interrogate prisoners, and navigate foreign terrain. Recognizing this gap, General George Marshall sought a solution. Inspired by the British, who had already mastered intelligence warfare, Marshall created a specialized training program. The location chosen was a 632-acre resort in Maryland, leased from the state and renamed after a former governor. Officially opened on June 19, 1942, Camp Ritchie operated under a fitting motto: "Facit et oppost dedocere Latin, for it is right to be taught, even by an enemy." At first, the camp was modest, with soldiers housed in tents and few permanent buildings. But as its importance grew, significant investment transformed it into a full-scale intelligence training facility complete with barracks, classrooms, mess halls, a theater, tennis courts, 2 man-made lakes, and a chapel that welcomed soldiers of all faiths. Training extended beyond the camp's borders. Recruits navigated rough landscapes in a nearby recreation park, honed their aerial photography skills in a leased hangar, and conducted map-reading drills on local farmland. Though remote, Camp Ritchie was close enough to Washington, D.C., for direct coordination with military leadership. It represented a new kind of warfare, one where intelligence was as vital as firepower. The 8-week-long training course at Camp Ritchie pushed recruits known as the Ritchie Boys to their limits, and not everyone made it through. For 2 months, the men woke before dawn, immediately thrown into terrain intelligence training. They learned to draw and interpret maps, traverse difficult landscapes, and analyze unfamiliar environments, critical skills that often meant the difference between survival and failure in battle. Beyond navigation, the recruits underwent rigorous training in signal intelligence, deciphering Morse code and operating intricate communication systems. Some were even taught to use carrier pigeons, ensuring vital messages could be delivered across war zones without interception. The curriculum was as demanding as it was diverse. Soldiers mastered writing intelligence reports, identifying enemy uniforms and weaponry, and scrutinizing aerial photographs with the precision of forensic experts. These black and white battlefield images, some only days old and flown in from war zones across Europe, Africa, and Asia, revealed hidden threats, camouflaged vehicles, troop movements, and defensive fortifications. Training the mind was just the beginning. Under the instruction of Frank Levitt, a former professional wrestler, recruits engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat exercises. They learned to dismantle booby traps, breach enemy hideouts, and endure punishing field exercises that left them stranded in unknown terrain for days. Forced to apply every skill they had learned, these exercises determined who was ready for war and who wasn't. As the course progressed, training became more specialized. In the final 3 weeks, each soldier's skills were refined for their specific role in combat. Yet, for some recruits, training at Camp Ritchie meant more than just military preparation. It meant confronting an enemy they understood better than anyone. Camp Ritchie was unlike any other military training ground. While all recruits were held to the same high standards, physical endurance, intelligence, and teamwork, the camp's greatest asset was its diversity. Soldiers came from across the U.S., but nearly half had been born overseas. Among them were approximately 2,000 Jewish refugees, men like Guy Stern, who had fled Nazi persecution and found a new purpose in the U.S. Army. Their fluency in German, deep understanding of the culture, and first-hand knowledge of Nazi tactics made them uniquely suited for intelligence gathering. More than just soldiers, they were weapons of psychological warfare. But for these men, the mission was deeply personal. Military Academy at West Point. They knew what life was like under the Nazis, and they wanted to defeat them. After an exhausting train ride, Guy Stern finally arrived at Camp Ritchie. As he stepped onto the grounds, he immediately sensed its intensity. Officially named the Military Intelligence Training Center, MIC, the recruits had a different name for it, one that reflected its organized chaos. We quickly nicknamed it the Military Institution of Total Confusion. After 5 weeks of general training, Stern was selected for an elite course in interrogation and assignment that would define his wartime role. Unlike the brutal techniques they had witnessed or suffered at the hands of the Nazis, Ritchie Boys were trained to rely on strategy, not force. Rather than physical intimidation, their training emphasized psychology, manipulation, and cultural familiarity. One of their most effective tactics was to begin interrogations with questions they already knew the answers to, tricking prisoners into believing there was nothing left to hide. To ensure authenticity, recruits like Stern practiced in meticulously constructed German-style villages, complete with actors portraying Nazi soldiers and civilians. Some played belligerent officers, others spun elaborate stories, all designed to challenge the interrogators' abilities. On rare occasions, actual prisoners of war were brought in from Europe to test the recruits under real pressure. The final test was simple but nerve-wracking: interrogate one of their own instructors. For many refugee soldiers, graduation was more than a military milestone, it was the start of a new identity. At a courthouse in Hagerstown, Maryland, many, including Stern, took the oath of American citizenship, with some choosing to Americanize their names to protect their Jewish identities if captured. Now fully trained, the Ritchie Boys were ready. Their battlefield awaited. In late May 1944, 63 Ritchie Boys completed their training and joined the 101st Airborne Division. On June 6, 1944, they parachuted into France as part of the D-Day invasion. Others soon followed, landing on the beaches or arriving in the days after, embedded in 6-man teams alongside various army units. As Guy Stern and his team approached Normandy, the dark waters of the English Channel churned violently beneath them. The briefings had prepared them for what lay ahead, yet the reality was far heavier. He later recalled, "We all were scared. We were briefed that the Germans were not going to welcome us greatly. As a Jew, I knew I might not be treated exactly by the Geneva rules." Once on French soil, the Ritchie Boys wasted no time. They quickly set up a makeshift interrogation facility, a barbed wire enclosure nicknamed the Cage. Mud-soaked and exposed to the elements, conditions were harsh. Both prisoners and interrogators slept on the ground. Yet, despite the challenges, they pressed on, extracting critical intelligence that could turn the tide of battle. Their most essential tool was the order of battle, a detailed manual mapping the entire structure of the Wehrmacht, from unit hierarchies to commander names. Every Ritchie boy was required to memorize its contents, ensuring they knew their enemy inside and out. Stern's first interrogation was anything but easy. Across from him sat a wiry German soldier, his expression unreadable. Stern knew the man wouldn't break easily, but his mission was clear. Our orders were to get tactical and strategic information that was directed at what we could do to further the war goals. Minutes turned into hours, and still, the prisoner refused to talk. The distant sound of artillery and gunfire only added to the tension. Then, without warning, the ground shook. A shell exploded mere feet away, sending dirt and debris flying. Instinctively, Stern hit the ground, landing beside his prisoner. Coughing through the dust, ears ringing, he looked up. His captive was now visibly shaken. Sensing an opportunity, Stern turned the conversation back to his questions. The disoriented prisoner hesitated, then began to talk. "That first interrogation was only the beginning. After that, I was on the road to interrogate him, and after him, thousands of prisoners." As the Allies advanced, the Ritchie Boys became an integral part of nearly every major battle. They interrogated thousands of Nazi soldiers, war criminals, and civilians, gathering intelligence on troop movements, defensive strategies, and enemy weaknesses. Each night, they compiled their findings into detailed reports, typed them up in the field, and relayed them up the chain of command. It didn't take long to discover a powerful psychological weapon: the Nazis' overwhelming fear of Russian captivity. Many resistant prisoners could be broken with one simple threat that their silence would lead to a transfer to the Soviets. If words alone didn't work, some Ritchie Boys, including Stern, donned Russian officer uniforms, their cold demeanor enough to make many break their silence. By summer 1944, German forces in Normandy were crumbling. By August, Paris was liberated, and Nazi troops were pushed from France. But Hitler was far from defeated. In December 1944, as the Allies closed in, Hitler launched a counterattack in Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge. The offensive caught Allied forces off guard, and not all Ritchie Boys made it home. On December 16th, during the chaos of battle, Murray Zappler and Kurt Jacobs, two Jewish refugees turned interrogators, successfully captured a group of German soldiers. But just days later, a German counterattack overwhelmed their unit, forcing them to surrender. Among the prisoners, the German captives soon realized who Zappler and Jacobs were. The two were separated from the other Americans. A Nazi officer, Kurt Bruns, reportedly declared, "The Jews have no right to live in Germany." The Ritchie Boys were not confined to the European theater. They played a pivotal role in the Pacific, contributing intelligence to Guadalcanal, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and the Philippines wherever vital information was needed. By war's end, their contributions had proved invaluable. A U.S. Army report revealed that nearly 60% of the intelligence gathered in Europe came from the Ritchie Boys. Some historians even argue that their work shortened the war by 2 years. With World War II over, many of these men carried their skills into post-war efforts. They became translators, interrogators, and intelligence officers. Some even participated in the Nuremberg trials. Others pursued careers in science, politics, and business, shaping the very country that had once given them refuge. Guy Stern, awarded the Bronze Star for his military service, later became a professor of German literature. Yet, despite all he had accomplished, he would never see his family again. Reflecting on his war, he once said, "We were fighting an American war, and we were also fighting an intensely personal war. We were in it with every fiber of our being. We worked harder than anyone could have driven us. This was our war." For decades, their story remained largely unknown until a 2004 documentary finally brought their legacy to light. According to U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, These soldiers' military intelligence skills were a critical asset to the Allied forces and saved countless lives. We must ensure that the courage and sacrifice of the Ritchie Boys is recognized and never forgotten. 11. If you found this story fascinating, there's so much more history waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to FLYTOP and join us as we reveal the hidden heroes, untold battles, and secret missions that shaped our world. What incredible story will we uncover next? Stay tuned.